Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We've now reached the point in the calendar of the London Book Fair when English Pen is very pleased to announce the winner of the Hessell Tiltman Prize. English Pen is hugely proud to be associated with the Hessell Tiltman Prize. It's the only prize that is awarded for a work of history that is judged to be of outstanding literary merit. And it was set up by a Pen member, Marjorie Hessell Tiltman, who loved Pen so much that she left a bequest in her will to set up the prize. The chair of judges this year is Philip Ziegler, himself a long-term Pen member and a very generous benefactor to English Pen. So we're absolutely delighted to welcome him to make the presentation. I'd like to say that this is very much about Pen members and those who have been generous through their lifetime to make this prize possible. That any of you here who are not yet members of Pen might like to consider joining our number and before you leave today, picking up some literature from our desk. But meanwhile, I'd love to introduce you to Philip Ziegler. Philip.
Are you all right to use this one?
We found it relatively easy to get down to a short list, but then the trouble really began. We, all of us, had to abandon books which we liked enormously and felt somehow ought to be still on the list. But in the end, after much discussion, we came down to two books. The first was Christopher Clark's The Sleepwalkers, a book about the origins, the events leading up to the First World War. There's been an awful lot written about that, but Christopher Clark's book was different because he asked not why, but how. He traced in brilliantly researched detail, event by event, the disastrous course that led to the First World War. Every step seemed inevitable, every step seemed proper, every step was an appalling mistake. He called his book The Sleepwalkers, and it was indeed an account of a continent sleepwalking into war. The second book was Keith Lowe's The Savage Continent. This was about Europe again, but roughly between 1944 and 1946. Those terrible 2 years at the end of the war and the beginning of the peace, in which the continent was in chaos. There was no law, there was no order, there were no frontiers, there was famine, there was pestilence. There were enormous numbers of people roaming the streets of Europe, the roads of Europe, trying to get away from the Russians, trying to get back to their home. When they got there, they found it had probably been destroyed. It was a brilliant and a heartbreaking book. And it was one which made me feel profoundly grateful that Britain is an island and that it was never overrun by an enemy. And so, two admirable books. How does one pick a winner? It wasn't so much of saying one was better than the other as that one was right for this prize. We saw our duty as we defined a book which would be respected by the professional historian, but which also would appeal to the general reader. Of those two books, both were eminently in a class where the professional could only admire them. It seemed to us that one of them was less academic, perhaps, more geared to the judges, who had no specialist knowledge of a subject, but just loved a good and well-written and exciting book. And so, after much agonizing, but with absolute conviction we were right, we chose as our winner Keith Lowe's Savage Continent. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Now, have I got something to hand you?
Sorry?
Is this the envelope, do you think? This is what I'm passing it on, am I? Very well, we are.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
It's not quite what it used to be, I'm afraid.
And of course, you couldn't have written this before 1989.
No, absolutely not.
So it's post-Cold War history that we're seeing, really.
Yeah.
And to people in those places themselves, have you had any reaction? I mean, is it to them news, a lot of the stuff that you're saying, or is it something that they've all know all too well?
It's aspects of it are well known in various countries, but what I've found is that each country seems to have a very sort of insular idea of their own history, but doesn't necessarily know what was happening in the countries around them. I mean, this was one of the things that I really enjoyed about writing the book, and that fascinated me so much, is that the history of the Second World War is generally taken as the whole of Europe. So there are these huge sort of sweeping battles going across the continent from one side to another. But as soon as the war is officially over, in May 1945, everything sort of fragments. And each country just concentrates on their own national history and recreating a sort of form of national unity to try and rebuild after the war. I mean, that really comes across in the history books which have been written. And what I wanted to do was try and bring it all back together again, you know, sort of so that rather than consider what was happening only in Germany or only in France, but to see that the same themes were happening all across Europe, whether that was, you know, revenge or, you know, the rise of communism or anti-Semitism. They happened everywhere. It wasn't only in specific places. So yeah, so bringing everything back together again was the sort of main aim, I think, of this book.
And therefore, as I said before, you're not sort of judgmental. You're not taking sides. You're telling the story.
Well, there's been enough judging, I think. I mean, we've all been judging for decades, and actually that it doesn't help you to achieve a better understanding of the themes if you are starting off with a judgmental attitude.